Hi everyone and welcome to Green Monk TV. My guest on the show today is IBM's Drew Clark. Drew is the Director of Strategy for the IBM Venture Capital Group. Drew, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Tom. I'm delighted to be here.
Drew, so Venture Capital Group, you guys have a big bunch of money that you hand out to people.
Not quite, Tom. It's more like we have a large ecosystem that we'd like people to become a part of. It's more like we want to help small companies, in particular, venture-backed startups, get inserted into our ecosystem so that we can essentially bring them into what we think is a great opportunity in sustainability and energy.
So how does it work, Drew? Say I've got this small company with some interesting sustainable related, obviously we're talking about sustainability, seeing as it's an area of interest to me. So I've got this small product of a small company. How do I get your attention, number one, and then what's the process for coming into the ecosystem after that?
Good question. So we work primarily with about 150 VCs all over the world. So we're kind of plugged into the venture capital ecosystem as it exists here in the US and across Europe, across Asia, Nordic countries. We've got sensing all over. So one way is essentially through VCs. As a company receives an investment, typically the VCs are on the phone to IBM very quickly to say, can we connect my new company into some relevant part of IBM. The other way is kind of a process where we like to hang out in the right places. In talking to people like Red Monk, for example, or attending conferences, doing workshops with entrepreneurs. We kind of like to see for ourselves what's out there. So many times I'll run into entrepreneurs or companies who really want to have a great idea and want to kind of get into the IBM fabric. So it kind of is a referral process, and it's also a discovery process. I was going to say, once identified, then the real work begins, which is how do we kind of match up the particular technology or capability that the company has with some part of IBM, either a solution that we're building for our clients or perhaps a partner or channel that we've got that needs that particular capability. There are many ways to go to market once we kind of identify what that particular capability is.
What kinds of partnerships are you lining up at the moment, or have you lined up recently in the sustainability area?
Sure. Well, we're looking, naturally, being IBM, we're looking at kind of IT-intensive spaces. So, for example, we're working with several companies who are investing in sensing technology. You know, as I was mentioning to you earlier, you know, we're involved in lots of projects around sustainability of large bodies of water. For example, in Ireland, the Galway Bay Smart Bay project. In New York, in the US, the Hudson River project. And so both of those are great examples of IBM partnering with companies who are in the sensing business. And IBM, of course, with its analytical and analysis capability, it's a perfect marriage. So essentially IBM and its know-how about data management, we're talking about terabytes, petabytes of data here, managing the data and interpreting the data in terms of helping a business make a decision about what to do with the data, but then marrying that with a relationship with a company that's specializing in sensing technology is a good example. So not limited to that, but that's one way we're partnering, is with smaller companies that are really good at obtaining the data and all of the backhaul of the information out, the wireless technologies involved, the sophisticated sensors that detect things like heavy metals and other impurities in water, things like that.
I can see applications for those kinds of technologies in lots of areas. I mean, you mentioned water, and that's a great one. I also think when you start talking about those kinds of communications protocols and things like that, of things like smart grids, is that an area of interest for you guys as well?
Exactly. And something that we've discovered through our Smarter Planet initiative is that in many cases, everything from the sensing all the way to the analysis is very similar between water and electricity. If you think about it, both are very scarce resources. Both are constrained in terms of availability at certain times and so forth. Both are seasonal in the scarcity. Both really are essentially a sense and respond kind of technology. So what we're doing really is building a set of infrastructure that we think will be capable in managing water and electricity. And for example, the project we've got going in Malta, which you're familiar with, they've asked us to build them a complete soup to nuts kind of infrastructure to manage both water and electricity. And so I think, you know, from our point of view, we see a lot in common there, and we see a lot of carryover or transfer from those technologies.
When you talk about projects like the Galway Bay project and the Malta project, your typical customers there are not necessarily companies, they're more likely to be governments and municipalities.
They seem to be the early adopters here. You know, I mean, one of the challenges in sustainability is finding out who writes the check, for example, to be blunt about it. There's an issue of you know, given investment in this technology, who's in a position to frankly pay for it? Where's value going to be captured as we are able to bring this technology to the marketplace? And right now, the early adopters are the countries and municipalities and sometimes other federal agencies who really have an acute need to get underneath the issue of, for example, water management, and are willing to invest kind of ahead of the market, let's say. We think others will come along, though. I mean, I think that once the technology gets introduced and the scale is achieved, I think we can continue to deliver this technology, maybe at lower price points that will begin to attract companies and others. That's not to say that there aren't large companies involved also. I mean, you have large retailers, for example, who are very aware of their sustainability footprints, and they're investing as well. It just hasn't quite reached a mass market yet.
You mentioned a lot of governments and municipalities and larger companies are becoming involved in the sustainability agenda typically. Are you seeing trends about where it's happening, or is it pretty loosely all over the place?
So what we're seeing, Tom, is a lot of interest from the venture capital community investing in sort of non-agricultural uses of water management. Everything from consumer use, managing the amount of water you put on lawns, to things like golf courses and other larger uses of water in a non-agricultural sense. And so we think that a lot of that technology will kind of scale up and make its way up to perhaps larger agricultural uses. It's funny how some of it kind of starts in a consumer space and moves over to the commercial space. We certainly see that in places like wireless and social media. I think some of the technologies are moving that way as well.
We mentioned earlier similarities between electricity and water. Do you think we'll soon start seeing the electricity being priced the same way, or sorry, the water being priced the same way electricity is, so that you have time of use and seasonal pricing and time of day billing around water usage?
Absolutely, Tom. I think the first step is to establish a protocol for metering, right? To get metering in place so that we know what the demand is and we know how much is being consumed. The second step would be then to superimpose on that at least a seasonal pricing. I mean, if you're thinking about tiers for water, at least seasonal, perhaps climate related, geographically related, and maybe even time of day, as we're starting to see in electricity. And then perhaps we get to establishing a real true price for water, a real market.
Great. Superb. Drew, thanks a million for coming on the show.
My pleasure, Tom. Good to talk to you virtually or wherever. Come see us sometime.